Okay, good afternoon, good morning to some of you. Welcome to the Maastricht Sustainability Dialogues. I'm delighted to be here to moderate this session, which will be discussing outcomes reached at COP28 and next steps for industry towards tackling climate change. And what an opportune time to be having that discussion, of course, 24 hours after the UAE here, who was hosting COP28, Dr. Sultan Jaber, who was the COP president designate, declaring the UAE consensus for an enhanced, balanced, historic package to accelerate climate action. Clearly, the UAE deeming it a success. And I'm being hosted today, of course, by Maastricht, Mr. Ganesh Kumar Vijay Kumar, Assistant Vice President of Sustainability at Maastricht. And we're also delighted today to be joined by Sarah Akbar, Chairperson and CEO of OilServe Kuwait and Non-Executive Director of Petrofac, Narendra Taneja, India's leading energy experts, and Bill Spindle, Senior Global Correspondent at Cypher News. So delighted to have you all today joining us for the Maastricht webinar and looking forward to hearing your thoughts. First, I'm going to go to our host, Ganesh Kumar, to open the session for us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. As your host from Maastricht Bank, I'm truly honored to welcome you all to this important discussion just after 24 hours, as you mentioned, on the outcomes of COP28. And the next steps we all, as a part of industry stakeholders, needs to take towards tackling climate change. I'm just back from Dubai today morning to India. So having had the privilege of spending 13 intense but enlightening days at COP28, I can attest to the tireless debates, the exchange of innovative ideas, and the global commitment towards addressing the climate crisis. Despite the long hours where everybody spent, the experience was filled with hope, largely due to the technologies and the youth and energy transition, what I saw, which promise a sustainable future. Today, as we delve into a session, implementation outcomes reached at COP28 and next steps for industry towards tackling the climate change. Let's carry forward the spirit of hope and innovation. Let's remember that every step we take towards sustainability is a step towards a better future for us and generations to come. At Maastricht Bank, just want to start off, we are not just observers of this change, we are active participants. We are committed to the sustainable future, dedicated to sustainable finance, and we are steadfast to our commitment to the Science-Based Target Initiative, SBTA. We believe that as a financial institution, we have a pivotal role to play in driving this transition to the low-carbon economy. In addition, we also recognize the vital role of youth, clear energy transition, and SME innovation in tackling the climate change. So I thank you for joining us in this journey towards sustainability. I'm looking forward to your participation insights. And now I request the moderator to initiate the discussion, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ganesh Kumar. And we are going to be discussing, industry in general, of course, and how the agreement at COP28 may be directing different sectors towards their goals in climate mitigation. But let's start with the sort of elephant in the room, which is fossil fuels, and that is one big industry that was very much part of the discussion in the last 2 weeks. Bill, I'd like to go to you. The agreement reached included a transition away from fossil fuels, those words being included for the first time in a COP28 agreement, but by 2050. Now, how significant was that, in your opinion, to the real practical direction that we go in from now?
Yeah, I think it's a historic declaration. It really is the first time that a full COP, a full group of all the countries agreed that the problem at the end of the day is fossil fuels, and we need to ultimately, the solution is to transition away from them. It is, however, only a declaration, and declarations don't actually change anything on the ground unless they're acted upon, and that's really what we're going to see from here. And that's going to be a difficult road forward, but I think it is going to be made easier by this agreement, which was pretty hard fought. There was a lot of frustration on all sides, but in the end, they did agree on that transition. And I think that will set the course of future investment. I think it'll sort of smooth the path for a lot of things to happen in the real world, but none of those things are easy. And if it's not acted on, in the end, it will make no difference. But I think in and of itself, it's important, especially the other things that happen there.
Yeah, but I mean, just to continue on that point of, it's by 2050, right? For them to transition away from them by 20, that's a long way away. Many net zero goals are obviously targeting the same date. But I mean, does that actually make the situation for the oil and gas industry more vague than it was before, in a way? That we're going to transition. We knew we were doing that anyway. So what is the actual concrete difference? Okay, it's been included in the communique, but we were on the road to this transition anyway, weren't we?
Well, yes, although there was considerable debate even about that, really, I think in some circles, and I think this really does bring the time frame forward. Yes, it's 2050 still is the headline number, but the 2030 number has come up in a lot of places. I think there's an understanding that this transition is underway. And again, I don't know that this necessarily pushes it all forward in and of itself. It's just a declaration at the end of the day. But it is an acknowledgement of a transition that is already underway, probably unstoppable, which is one of the reasons why everybody was willing to go along with it. So I do think it's significant, but does need to be acted on.
Okay, well, Sarah, welcome again. Does this put the oil and gas industry and producers, more firmly in the driving seat, if you like, more than before? And they did, declare at the beginning of the COP meeting the commitment to net zero methane emissions by 2030. So, where does that position the industry itself? Do you think this is a positive outcome for producers? And will we see practical steps? Do you think more than we're seeing already?
Thank you, Diana. Look, the question is, was this a win-win situation for all? I believe so. I believe that this conference, for the first time, listened carefully to the requests from the oil and gas industry and from all the nations that did not have the privilege of being emitters of big quantity of CO2 to the atmosphere. So this is the first time that, and even in the declaration, you see the words just and equitable kind of statement. So the statements here actually brought some reality to the transition plans we had before. So this was the first COP that actually considered these elements. Now, as an industry, we really did not at any point in time deny that we know it's really not right to burn fuel into the transportation. And we believe oil and gas is far more valuable to create products to the world than burning it as fuel. So there is no question in mind of people in the industry. So what does this actually mean is we as an industry are not going to stop providing these products to the market. And when you talk about this transition in 2050, it is really challenging. Even with all the commitments that were made at COP, I believe it will be very challenging for this world to progress in the same manner, same pace that we are seeing now without burning fuel oil and burning all types of products that we produce. So yes, it is transition. I think there is more realism put into the plans now than any time before. And there is no animosity towards the oil and gas industry that we see in the past, like 5 years ago. They didn't want even to listen to us. We were never invited to these meetings. Now, there is some wisdom that came to the table, which says, look, guys, we really need you, but we need to work together in order to decarbonize, in order to remove the emissions, in order to find positive solutions for all, a win-win solution for all. And nobody, and I repeat this all the time, nobody on this whole planet is more equipped and capable of decarbonizing and cleaning than the oil industry. We have the capacity, we have the knowledge, we have the expertise, and we've been doing the huge project. The biggest projects on the planet are actually managed and created by the oil and gas. So we will have to direct some of that energy towards hydrogen, towards carbon sequestering, towards emission control, because we have the capability and the knowledge and the science. So the best people to solve the problem are the industry. And this is why I'm saying this has been the first time that they've been listened to, and it's a true win-win situation that we are at this point in time.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Narendra, welcome again. Let's talk a bit about your perspective. First of all, what's your main takeaway from the agreement? Clearly, it's kind of positive for India. There was even weaker language on coal than usual. Is that a good thing for India? Is it not? What's your main takeaway, winners and losers?
Well, good question. First of all, I would like to really compliment the United Arab Emirates for being such a wonderful host. Brilliant, very graceful, very dignified, very accommodating. I think without that, probably the COP28 would not have been a success, and we would not probably be discussing this here. So my compliments to them. It represents the Arab culture, the Eastern culture, and something I hope the Western countries will look, sit up and take notice of. That was really great. That said, at the same time, I mean, I'm happy about the total outcome, but I'm not too excited. It's a UN conference, and if you look at the UN Charter and the intent and the goals set in the UN Charter and by the United Nations over the decades, I mean, in most places they have not succeeded. Look what's happening in Hamas, Israel. Looks what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in many other parts of the world. So I'm happy that the direction has been set, but I'm not too excited in terms of that we'll definitely get there. I mean, the signature of the powerful Western countries are very much there. To say that it was a consensus, I don't agree with it. Majority of countries, the direction or the narrative has been written by the powerful Western countries. And the other countries, they had no alternative but to go along, hoping that probably the climate finance would be available, technology would be available, hoping that these powerful Western countries, because they are the ones who write most narratives, unfortunately, but that what they said, they will walk the talk. If you look at the COPs of the past, they have not walked the talk. So that's why, while we celebrate the outcome, it's important that we also express our kind of, reservations. Because my own sense is that if you look at the language, good thing is that they've talked about climate justice, they've talked about other things as well, and which in a way indicate that, the energy have-not countries or energy poor countries won't suffer. So that's a good thing. And also saying that, transitioning away from fossil fuels, I mean, it has been already happened. But nevertheless, I think it's a very good outcome. But important thing is that in the declaration or in the deliberation, the focus has been only on one thing, to basically use the correct language, correct phrase, to set the intent, the agenda. But have we gone through a thorough scientific research? How is going to happen? Who has done that? International Energy Agency, I'm sorry, they represent only the rich countries. They don't represent me. They don't represent 6.7 billion people in the global south. And very often their data are questioned by some Western experts. Forget about the others in other parts of the world. So therefore, who had done the research? How is going to happen? Where are the milestones? Where, for instance, were the companies which produce a bulk of the traditional energy? And by the way, 82% of energy still comes from traditional sources like oil, gas, coal, etc., etc. So my sense is, unless we see major breakthrough in terms of nuclear fusion, and also we see the massive commercial viability of, like hydrogen, I have my serious doubt we will get there by 2050. Very serious doubt, unless I say. But at the same time, when you look at the number of companies in the traditional energy, whether you are in coal sector, oil sector, gas sector, kind of money they need to invest in exploration production in order to meet the requirement of, emerging economies in particular, but for everybody. I mean, I'm just expressing my not doubts by my serious reservation. My only concern is intent is very good. The goal set is wonderful and I compliment for them. But where is the roadmap? Where are the milestones? Who has done the research? That has not happened. So that's why I'm keeping my fingers crossed and wishing them well.
Okay, well, thank you, Narendra. Part of that roadmap, Bill, back to you, is of course money, isn't it? Finance. All of this requires a lot of money to achieve the commitment. Part of the agreement, again, this week was doubling energy efficiency, tripling renewables, all these very great aspirational targets that, if they happen, will help us to resolve climate change. We saw, more than $80 billion of pledges towards different funds, the Loss and Damage Fund announced at the beginning of the meeting. But it is about that practical. How can this, if this money is pledged, when and how will it get to the economies and developing countries that need it, right? And of course, Bill, just to ask you, the cost of capital has also changed, hasn't it, in the last year or two? What are you sort of sensing or hearing on whether that's going to, it's already impacting certain renewables projects in certain parts of the world. Is that, do you think, going to be a concern going forward, given that we really are focusing now on where's the money?
Yeah, absolutely. The money is the critical thing to all of this. And it's important to understand that that's largely upfront money, huge amounts of money upfront that in many ways you get back later by preventing the damages that climate change would cause and simply by the payoff over a long period of time. So, but that doesn't change the fact that a huge amount of money is needed up front, and it's particularly needed in the developing world, where capital is short and where need is great and where simple basic energy accessibility needs are huge. So yeah, that really is the linchpin of all of this. Is the money going to be able to move both in the face of higher borrowing costs overall, but also is it going to move from the wealthy countries that have money that largely caused this problem to get to the developing world where that money is really needed and where the future emissions will come in large part if they're not headed off by this big flood of investment. And that really, while there was a lot of pledging and a lot of fanfare, we're really not seeing the sums of money that we need. The Loss and Damage Fund was operationalized. They sidestepped a major conflict over that, yet not even beginning to see the amounts of money that need to go into that fund, particularly from a place like the United States, which, the amount of money they put up was absolutely pathetic by any stretch of the imagination. But that's going to have to happen. It's going to have to happen in a bigger way, or this will fall apart over time, and it will be, as Narendra said, much harder to achieve by 2050.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Sarah, there was also a reference in the agreement to make more room or acknowledge the space that transitional fuels are still very much part of the equation. No plan to sort of, I suppose, transition away from there. That's kind of obviously gas, criticized by a lot of people because, again, that is cleaner fuel than oil, but still dirty. How does that sort of balance? How do you look at that in terms of allowing that in the communique to continue? Is that just to allow time for us, to get CCS and hydrogen, all the other technologies, caught up? Your point of view on that, and including that.
So Diana, first, if you're asking me where would that money come from, I have one suggestion. If we stop putting money into war and destruction and direct it towards clearing the planet, then I think we can achieve much better outcome for the whole world. I think now there is a bill for $106 billion to go into war. I mean, if they can raise that kind of money for destruction, I think they can raise even bigger amount for construction and for creating a better world for all of us. Now, about the gas, now think about it. If you create hydrogen from gas by removing CO2, we call it blue hydrogen, it's 1/3 of the cost of creating hydrogen molecule from electrolyzing and creating that through green mechanism. So I want to understand, why is that not the number one option for all of us, is to decarbonize, create hydrogen from gas, and it achieves the same objective. What do we have against gas if we can clean it and use it as hydrogen, the best fuel? And I believe hydrogen is the fuel of the future. So if you ask me about gas, I think that is the direction for gas. It is much cheaper than any other technology to create hydrogen, and it's an available resource, so why not?
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Narendra, just back to that in terms of India's sort of transition, energy transition agenda. Obviously it has a serious plan on that front, still though very much dependent on oil imports. We'll get off energy in a minute, but I just wanted to ask your point of view on that in terms of, does the COP agreement, does India's negotiation and participation in that influence at all its direction and commitment to energy transition? It's sensitive to oil prices. We're now dropping below $80, very nice for India. But, does this COP agreement trigger anything within Indian policy and government policy towards investment also in dedicating its own capital to the energy transition?
Well, you see, India is investing heavily in renewables. COP or no COP. We are doing it because we are a densely populated country and we want to take care of our children and grandchildren. So we are doing for that reason. Paris or Sharm el-Sheikh or Dubai, that's not really important, but I think we have our own agenda. But our problem is that, we are importing 86% of our total requirement of oil, 56% our total requirement of natural gas we are importing. People talk of gas or oil in the same volume. And we are also importing, for solar, 86% of, cells and panels we use, we are importing. So we are extremely vulnerable in terms of our energy security. Only source of fuel which provides us the kind of security we need as a nation is coal, which is indigenously produced. That's why we are very touchy when it comes to coal, because 68% power that we consume in the country, and we have kind of installed capacity of 420,000 megawatt, is coming from coal. So coal is the backbone of India's economy, especially when it comes to energy security. So I think we are keeping that in mind. But India will continue to use oil for rather aggressively for at least another 20 years, and natural gas maybe for another 30 years, and coal maybe for another 25 years. Coal power plants which are coming up now are going to be around for 35 to 40 years. We are not going to dismantle them overnight. So the point, it all depends on geopolitics, how the new world order emerges, what other countries do. Today, in Dubai, for instance, the rich, powerful Western countries have managed to basically impose the way they look upon energy transition, and the world had no option but to go along with it. But in 15 years from now, at COP, things might change. India might be more powerful, China might be able to speak more, Russia more at peace, and then Saudi Arabia and Iran probably may become even bigger powers in the region. So who knows? So point is that, climate summit in Dubai or before the Sharm, these are all political summits. These are not summits controlled by or, for instance, driven by, piloted by scientists. No, these are political summits. So this COP28 is basically the product of international world order today, but the world order is fast changing. So India will respond accordingly. That's it. Today we see that if the world goes like this, fine, we will try to manage it. But for us, the top priority is our economic growth. Top priority is eradication of poverty. Top priority is to help other developing countries of the global south in eradication of poverty and development. But if global north and others, they are willing to participate, transfer not only capital at affordable rates, technology at the same time, are going to work in a more collaborative manner. I think what we have agreed in Dubai is going to be a great story. But if that does happen, if it's part of some only political agenda, then we're going to see a lot of frustration. And by the way, I want to mention one thing. If we don't succeed in what, for instance, we have decided to set our goal as the world, we are going to see, and unless these things are handled very carefully, we are going to see in decades from now, energy starvation, energy famines in many parts of the world. We don't want to see that. And a country like India is not going to let that happen. But just to conclude, unless we make sure that energy and climate are two sides of the same coin, and we don't decouple energy from climate, we will make progress. If the efforts are to decouple energy from climate or climate from energy, we will reach to the wrong conclusion and will be writing a very, very wrong narrative.
Okay, thanks, Narendra. Bill, just to talk about, I don't know if it came up at all in the discussions that you attended or conversations that you had. Carbon credits, the whole debate around that, the sort of strategy of that. was that a conversation at all? Of course, doesn't just involve, oil and gas production, but also steel, the hard to abate industries that are emitting carbon. Are we making progress on that front, do you think? And is it becoming a more credible tool?
Yeah, I think the discussions about carbon markets did take place. There were quite a lot of them around this, mostly on the sidelines. They were not sort of center stage for very much of the time, a bit of the time. There continues to be a lot of hope because there's a lot of hope around financing, and it is seen as a way that money can find its way particularly from the developed world to the developing world for a lot of valuable projects. The carbon markets are kind of a mess. Confidence is extremely low. There's been a big effort to turn that around. I'm not sure they fully got there. Some of the big UN issues around what's called Article 6, and they're about as arcane as you can possibly get, were left unresolved till next year. So I think there's still quite a bit of work to be done there, but nobody's giving up on it because they see it as one of many pathways. And I think similar with multilateral bank reform, which we heard a lot about this year, I think we saw some significant incremental marginal changes there, but certainly not the revolution in kind of multilateral banking that is probably going to be needed, is almost certainly going to be needed to move this process forward in line with this grand declaration.
Yeah, and I don't know if Ganesh Kumar, at any point, if you'd like to comment on any of the financing challenges, please do just let us know.
Yeah, I was listening to the interesting comments. One of the things you also see is the lack of taxonomy across the globe with respect to what is green. For example, you want to invest in some places, but if something you're saying something is green, what about India? What about, let's say, other places in the world? So the lack of taxonomy is one place where we really struggle, because the problem of greenwashing and those things comes in. That's very important. Number two is also the kind of a public-private partnerships, because from a financial perspective, you see the bankability of the project also, right? We have to answer to our stakeholders, shareholders, etc. So what about the kind of a partnership between governments and policies and frameworks which supports and make sure that all the stakeholders put the money at the right place so that it helps in the other. So one is that taxonomy, and number two is the kind of policy frameworks to support institutions, to support private corporations, and even carbon market. For example, carbon capture storage is one of the major termed in the paper. But how is the investment coming in? What is the how is going to climate? Which base of it? So this is where there's a lack of information, which is a challenge currently we are seeing.
Okay, thanks, Ganesh Kumar. Sarah, on that point of sort of PPP, public-private partnership, and those two sides of the coin working together better, the private sector perhaps, does it have enough clarity from policy in terms of the investments it's making towards tech solutions for the energy transition or for abating emissions? Do you think that is being done well, whether that's in the Gulf, where we have oil and gas production, or indeed any other industrial countries? Is policy directing sufficient?
So in the past 5 years, the only policy that was directing anything was a policy by the banks and Western banks, driven by shareholder forces and the environmentalists and so on, not to fund oil and gas. So it was very tough for oil and gas companies to access funds. Now, I think recently, because of the demand, because of the kind of the market actually changed that picture, because people realized, but we cannot actually survive without investing oil and gas to get a just transition. So there is a U-turn in that area where now there is some funding, private equity funds, banks, Exim banks, they are back funding to a certain extent the oil and gas sector. Now, as you see, all of this is currently being executed and evolving. It is really the beginning of an evolution of this market for energy. It's not there yet. Not the policy, nowhere, not even in Europe, not in the US. It is all happening now as we speak. And I think the results of this conference will direct it and accelerate it so that we do have policies in place, we do have guidelines, we do have, actual funds that exist that support this, and they have some track record. Funds normally operate in 5 to 10 year kind of environment. So there is no fund that was established, that invested, that returned, that it didn't happen yet for all of this kind of new technology and the new energies. So it is the start of the revolution. I think the guidelines that everything that happened in COP will actually accelerate it and will help it to develop. It is in development at this stage.
Okay, Narendra, there is, in terms of the energy transition, it's been very much, not very much, but we've had, it's been government-led, but actually the private sector has been at the forefront, let's say, of the technology that has come forward in terms of solutions for that. But what we're seeing, as governments have committed more to the transition, they're likely to get more involved, aren't they, in terms of their own action there. A lot of people are saying that that's going to put us back a step, because we're going to get stuck in the nitty-gritty of politics and geopolitics and all the other commitments that governments have. Better be left, it all had better be left to the private sector. Within India, is there who are the main actors on that front in terms of private versus public, and what do you think would be a more efficient way forward?
Well, that's a very, very interesting point. The kind of commitments or the direction which has been set at COP28 would actually lead to governments across the world, even in the developed countries, being asked to play a bigger role, and in the energy sector as a whole, the entire chain. And the International Energy Agency's boss has been already saying that the government needs to intervene more and all that. And in India, the public mood is the energy sector is still, to a very great extent, controlled by the government. But the public mood is, public wants that private sector to play a bigger role. And increasingly, like in renewables, like in solar or wind, it's the private sector which is playing a bigger role. And hydrogen is going to be the same story. And I'm sure even in fusion, whenever it becomes a reality, is going to be the same story. In natural gas, is this already the same story? So I think, this is going to be a huge challenge, in the sense, not only in India, but across the global south, and I'm sure even in the rich countries or the global north, that if, in order to get there, the government would have no option, or the governments across the world would have no option but to actually start playing a bigger role. And that's going to be a huge challenge, because in many economies, including India, private sector is considered more efficient, and the fact it is more efficient. And the public sector is perceived to be not that efficient. We can go by the history of the last 70 years in my country. So therefore, that's a dilemma. And I think if government is kind of either sucked in, or the government steps in or whatever, I don't think it's going to be a very happy situation. A, investors would not be willing to put in money, and B, technology transfer is going to take time, and 3, the sector is not going to be that efficient. We have seen that across many countries. So I think this is going to be huge, this thing, without the government actually moving into the cockpit, controlling everything, almost everything. We'll not be able to get there. And if the government has to do it, especially when it comes to the large countries like India, China, and other parts, that's going to be a challenge. That's going to really slow down things. So I think along the way, as I said, capital, technology transfer, affordable technology, affordable capital, and the private sector being allowed to play a bigger role. So there's going to be many, many challenges. And I think that's what I said. Where are the milestones? Who have done the research? Intent is great, but the point is, along the way, that's where the real mountains are going to emerge. They're where the real China walls are going to emerge. And climbing those China walls, climbing those Everest mountains, not going to be easy. So I'm happy, but am I ready to celebrate, go on the rooftop with the bottle of champagne? No way.
Okay, we're not cracking over the champagne yet. Bill, just back to you, just for one sort of final comment in terms of bankable projects, scaling up, etc. It's one thing for us to consider what are individual countries doing on their own turf, but of course you have, and I'll come to you, Sarah. What you have, countries like China with their BRI, Belt Road Initiative, having in the last decade invested in several, not necessarily transition projects, but many projects across Asia in particular. You have Gulf countries planning, to go sort of to spend and invest beyond their borders. Is that a positive thing for us to be mitigating climate change, do you think? Or should we be focusing more, let's just get on with our own emissions, everyone, and leave every country to itself?
No, I think governments are going to have to play a huge role within their own countries and particularly the biggest countries, the U.S., China, the big capitalized countries can play a huge role moving capital into the developing world and building the things that are going to need to be built. And, first and foremost, probably among all these things is grid. Grid infrastructure is desperately needed in just about every country. China is doing extremely well within its own country and clearly has the talents and technologies and the capital to help out in the developing world, and has shown the desire to do that with Belt and Road, and probably just needs to shift a lot of those more traditional fossil fuel investments. It's slowly been happening, but in a much faster way to more clean energy related stuff in those same parts of the world. Okay,
thanks, Bill. Well, I'm afraid we've gone a bit over time. This conversation could have gone on, and as Sarah has had to get on to another call, but so thanks you for that. Ganesh Kumar, I'll go back to you just to wrap up for us. Thank you so much for hosting this session.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. As we conclude this enlightening session, I would like to express my gratitude to all the panelists, the moderator, for your active involvement and the insightful contributions. As all of us agree, the discussion deliberations of COP28 have set a new benchmark, collective commitment towards addressing climate change with new initiatives. But the outcomes reached at COP are not just milestones, but I believe it's a stepping stone for our sustainable future. The industry's role is pivotal. So as Mashreq, we believe that as we move forward, it is critical that we translate our commitments into actions. The next steps, as all the panelists mentioned, is to be guided by the innovation, collaboration, and sense of urgency between government and public with a true public-private partnership. But let's not forget that this is fight against climate is not a choice, but a necessity. We should not also think it's a burden, but it's an opportunity to create a sustainable and resilient world for our future generations. So in closing, I urge each one of us, all the stakeholders who are listening to us, to carry forward the spirit of COP28 and continue to strive for a greener and healthier planet. We are happy to work together because together we can make a difference. Thank you so much for the insightful contributions. Thank you so much. Looking forward.
Thank you, Ganesh Kumar. And you just made that point that, of course, it's not just all an obligation, but there is money to be made in these solutions as well, of course, which is a point that's always being impressed. Thank you so much for Mashreq to host this webinar. Thank you to Bill Spindle, Sarah Akbar, and Narendra Taneja. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.